Welcome to WANDEROUS. I'm your host, Andrew Crusoe. I'm a writer, podcaster, but you know what? It's not about me, okay? Everybody goes on and on and on about their bio in the beginning of a podcast. It's not about me. I'm here to share true stories of how travel has totally changed my life. I've traveled on an unbelievably low budget for the last over 2 years now. The story is also about personal growth and how you can do what I've been doing. Okay? This show is a little more rough around the edges than my other shows. I've certainly succumbed to perfectionism and doing like 10 takes of a line in the past. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't have access to the chemicals that would allow my brain to do that right now. This show is meant to show you the authentic side of world travel. We're also going to explore shame and self-acceptance. We're going to explore resilience. We're going to explore human kindness, humbling levels of human kindness and generosity, of course. And just how absurdly gorgeous the earth really is. I'm gonna hit you with some keywords. Couchsurfing.com. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about adventure beyond your dreams. We're gonna talk about hilarious airline flights, of course. England, Scotland, France, Belgium, Germany, Turkey, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Japan, Indonesia, and more. I see this podcast as really a spiritual successor to 10,000 Hours in Paradise. If you don't know, 10,000 Hours in Paradise is a 3-volume action memoir that I wrote a little while ago about this totally wild true story of when I thought I was visiting Hawaii for 1 month. I thought I would stay for a month anyway, and I ended up staying for 10,000 hours. I ended up staying for well over a year. And that is really the beginning of a lot of this. That triggered a lot of events that forever changed the course of my life. And now those 3 books, which are available in all the places and as an audiobook, that was sort of my pandemic project, was producing over 20 hours of that. And that's really fun. And the first one has over 400 ratings now, blah, 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 blah. It's a story of love and lava and work trade. And there's even mushrooms in there. It's the UFOs. It's just out there. And this show is going to be a little woo-woo. I should warn you, there's going to be some woo-woo. I feel like I write a very delicate balance between a deep respect of science and a huge inspiration to me have been people like Bill Nye. I mean, I'm the right generation for it, I suppose. People like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yeah, people who have done this deep and important work of communicating science in a way that the layperson can understand it. But there's also other people who are a little more woo-woo that I'll probably talk about on this show. People who are still with us, and people who are not with us anymore. People like Robert Monroe, who wrote a series of books about having out-of-body experiences. See, it's just a one-take show. I'm not going to edit that. As I already said, I don't have the medication to have the patience to go back and fix that. You're going to have to ask for your money back. But it's a free show, so I can't help you. So we're going to balance science and woo. We're going to talk about energy sometimes. I'm going to talk about my subjective experience. I'm going to talk about the increasingly subjective nature of reality. What does that mean? So we'll get into that, what that means. But objective reality is basically something that we can all measure together, something that is obviously true. Like if I drop this lightning to mini jack adapter. If I drop it, it will fall because we all observe gravity together. But there are also subjective truths, things that are only true for me, things that you cannot validate, things that might be completely insane to you, but are even reproducible for me, or maybe only observable by me if you're in my body. And I think we get hung up, especially in the West, we get very hung up on discerning between the two. So we're going to explore that in this show. It's going to be fun. It's going to be really fun. That's my intention. I like to state some intentions at the top of these new projects. Once we get rolling, and I feel like we're rolling now. Do you feel like we're rolling? I feel like we're rolling along. I mean, after that kind of wild, I wouldn't call it a theme song, jingle? That's sort of the little otherworldly, little strange perspective that we're coming with. We'll also talk about how I feel like I'm an alien on this planet. And I don't really like that word, actually, because it's been diluted and it means a lot of things now. But I do feel like a visitor, and I have a feeling that this show will appeal and find its way to people who feel similarly, especially in the grand complex that is the internet these days. Things tend to, if produced decently, which is something that I'm doing my best with the equipment that I currently have. I don't have an expensive condenser microphone right now, but I think this sounds good enough to communicate the message and the stories, more importantly, that I'm going to talk to you about. So, a little bit of backstory. In 2018, I moved back to Hawaii. I moved back in time just in time for a once in a 300 to 400 year lava flow that covered, a significant percentage of Puna, that's lower district. And I would fall asleep several nights hearing explosions, for like several kilometers away. And I would see this orange glow on the southern horizon for months. I'll probably talk about that time more in other episodes. What I want to start with today is sort of the general backstory of what led me to start traveling globally around the world, because that's what you're here for. That's probably what you saw in the description. But I want to mention one more thing, which is relevant, which is that in 2019, I was hit by a drunk driver when I was crossing the street. I don't remember this. I have several hours of missing time, and I just woke up in the hospital, like you do when you get a major concussion. Now, I probably sound normal. I probably sound fine. But I was really messed up. And I talk about this. I didn't have a sense of smell for 6 months, which is a real bummer. In addition to being a real bummer, also, as you can imagine, if you really chew on that for a second, it's going to mess with your appetite. And an appetite is not a thing you want to mess with. So my eating patterns were a little more sporadic. I mean, I made myself eat sometimes. I wasn't really weighing I probably didn't, I was still eating, but it was just a much more chaotic time for me. The biggest problem actually was the anxiety every day of just little things. I had no tolerance for stress anymore. And I had my own business at the time, a business that I would later lose during the pandemic. That's another story we can talk about if people want. This is an interactive podcast as well. But I kept working because I had no other means to survive. I kept selling my books. What I was doing was selling my tropical sci-fi novels and 10,000 Hours in Paradise around Hawaii Island, where I was living at the time. Luckily, it wasn't like, it's not like I was doing trigonometry or calculus every day. It wasn't extreme, but I had to be very present and a good salesperson. So it was a very interesting balance to be in recovery, going to therapy, dealing with this anxiety, and dealing with also a constellation, we could say, of memory problems. Now, luckily, the brain is pretty resilient. The concussions that I received in my frontal lobe and my temporal lobe, so basically like my top of my forehead, I had a cool scar for a while. It was like a Harry Potter situation. And in my temporal lobe, that got better, luckily. And part of that is, I ate healthy. I made sure I got enough sleep, and I had a good therapist. And I also have a thick skull, is what my father used to tell me, which has probably helped me in my life. But that is its own crazy story. And if you want to know more about that, you can listen to the first episode of another podcast I did. I don't know the status of that as of now as you're listening to this, because my intention for Wanderous, which is WANDROUS, it's like Wondrous, but it's for wanderers. Get it? Yeah, I like the name. It's a show. I did another show before this called Ascendant, which was an interview show, which I may have already would have had brought in word tenses. Word tenses, conditionals of things from the future, because you're listening to this in the future and who knows what will happen. But the first episode of that show, which is a thing that happened in my past, so it will also be the same in your past. The first episode of that show goes into great, hilarious, fascinating, rubbernecky level of detail. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes of this episode, so you can go and find it. My friend Caitlin and I, Caitlin actually held a lovely, lovely, lovely space for that conversation, which was initially the first episode was going to be about attachment theory, but it came up. So I'm going to skip over a few things here so we can get to the travelistic things. Is travelistic a word, or did I invent it? I don't know. As you are undoubtedly aware, a year after 2019, the funniest thing happened. And I lost my business when all of the flights were grounded into Hawaii in almost exactly a year after I got that concussion in March of 2019. The CDC declared a global pandemic, you might recall. Crazy, crazy times. And because my my business relied mostly on tourists coming to Hawaii and going, oh, look at this funny guy, babe, come here. He wrote this book. It's a blue book. And I would sell it to people. I met people from all over the world, and it felt like a prelude of traveling globally, because I would meet people from everywhere. Not just 1,000 Germans, because as we know, Germans get around. Germans are some of them. Germans and the Dutch, I suppose. They're just traveling so much. It's really good. It's a good thing. You meet Germans everywhere, by the way, almost everywhere. They're very well-traveled people. It's something I like about them. But when those tourists stopped coming, I lost that business, and thank goodness. And I part of this show is also acknowledging my privilege as a white, straight man. I know this, it's something that we can also talk about if people, because that factors into, especially when you go to places in South Asia, there is a level of, you get treated differently than if you came in a different package. But part of this part of this show is also about oneness. This is something else that's very important to me, and it's very obvious probably to you, but not to everyone, that we are all the same. We are all really, really similar. We certainly have different thought processes, but our needs and our what drives 99% of people is extremely, extremely similar. And our journeys often in the aggregate, in the metaphor, are quite similar. Most of our journeys follow what we could call the hero's journey in some way, which is why things like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings have resonated so much around the world. But we can get into that later too. Part of this show, because it is something that's featured on my Patreon very prominently, is a co-creative aspect. So if I mention a story and you want to hear more about it and you feel like I didn't describe it enough, there's a possibility that I will listen to you, especially if you join the Patreon for free. So it's patreon.com/Hello Crusoe. It's the word hello, HELLOCRUSOE. Hello Crusoe, like Robinson Crusoe. Pause for a laugh. Robinson Crusoe is a fictional character that has the same last name as me, because life is weird. We're in a simulation, but we'll get to that too. The thing is, I want this to be co-creative. I want people to be really inspired by the occasionally reckless risks that I've taken. Not really reckless, but I want people to be inspired by some of these stories and going outside your comfort zone and going into the unknown, mostly the unknown within yourself. Part of my preparation for this first episode was looking at the photos from 2022, which is when the preparation for travel really started. Now, I had moved to Honolulu. I had left the big island of Hawaii as an experiment because the pandemic really changed. It really changed Hawaii for me. Now, the state is called Hawaii. The island I was on, the biggest one, is called Hawaii with a V sound. So if I just want to explain that so you don't get confused, because it is kind of confusing. They took the name of the big island and then they anglicized it and made it easier to say, I guess. I was living in Honolulu for some reason, and it was an experiment, and I really valued my time there. But it wasn't, and ultimately was not a great match for me, for several reasons. But mostly it was hard to find tribe there. There was some, but there weren't a lot of people who had, there's many subcultures, and something like 25% of the working population of Oahu work for the military, which is fine, but the military had their own kind of bubble, and I wasn't in that bubble. So there was some challenges there. I met some good people, but sometimes you move to a place and you appreciate things about it, but you really feel in your gut, and this is a show about intuition as well. You really feel in your gut that it's not going to ever really feel like home. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling, and you might even feel like, oh, I've made a big mistake. I always knew it was a bit of a risk. I looked at it as, well, I'm getting a spot that's month to month, and my gut did say, this could be a good thing. It might not be for a long time, but it's going to be a growth experience, and good and beautiful things will happen. And they did. And of course, right before I decided to leave, all of these. I finally saw a bunch of things that I was meaning to do. Most of the time I was doing this audiobook, but do you ever get a feeling like moving is a time of rebirth? And looking back now, looking at the places that I lived, and looking at, my time in England and my time in Scotland and my time in France, that interlude was really the perfect jumping off point, because I'd already been forced to collect my life and move it to Honolulu and minimize my life. And then it was just like I kept being in a place for less and less time. It was like the universe was preparing me, okay, you got to live in Hilo for, 3 years straight, just about. And then I was in Honolulu for less than a year. And then I was in England I was in the UK for about a month. So I was sort of like, it was just kind of like warming me up to it in a way. The universe was like warming me up to being a little more flexible, a little less attached to one particular place. And maybe my whole life was preparing me for that. I mean, as I talk about in 10,000 Hours in Paradise, I had like 7 addresses. Yes, I lived in 7 different houses or apartments or whatever before I turned 13. Is it 6 or 7? I don't remember. It's 6 or 7. It's one of those. So I was all building up to this goal, right? This goal of, I'm finally going to go to France because my grandmother is from France. So this is an intro. I won't get into that right now. Maybe what I'll do is I will tell you a little bit about my last moments on Oahu and what I was really grateful for, because this is also a show about gratitude. There was something I came across recently that was about abundance. And my last show, Ascendant, was about journeys from scarcity to abundance. But now I wonder if I was focusing on the wrong, not wrong, but I wonder if there was another angle I could have taken with that, which was gratitude instead of focusing on abundance. If we focus on gratitude, I've noticed, if we focus on appreciation over abundance. I saw a quote about this. I can't remember who said it now. I apologize. But if we focus on appreciation for what we already have, if we find something, right? If we find something, and this is maybe the woo-woo part of the show. If we find something like that we feel grateful for, it lets the universe it at the very least, it removes some blockages in our beliefs. And I hope in the course of this show that it's my ambitious belief, my ambitious intention, I should say, to shift your beliefs, dear, sweet, beautiful soul, beautiful listener, to shift your beliefs about what's possible. We can get stuck in these perpetual cycles, these perpetual thought patterns. And it's a survival thing, right? And like life is challenging, and there is chaos, and it certainly keeps it interesting, right? You may wake up in a hospital and not know what's going on. You may wake up walking down a street and just come out of shock, which happened to me in 2024. That's another story. Somebody sideswiping you while you're on a bike, and you may have a very blurred memory of that. Stuff, and you may find that you're bleeding from your mouth. But you recover. You recover, usually. And it's the thing is like I want to expose like the whole authentic package, you know, the whole authentic package, but also I want to kind of poke at reality a bit and get you asking some questions. You know, what if you went somewhere? What if you flew to a country where you didn't know anyone? What would happen? What if you listened to that still small voice that said, I really want to see Ireland before I die? You know, you probably, or it might be anywhere. You probably have something. You probably have a yearning or a pull that you've been trying to distract yourself from. You might, or it might manifest another way. You might have a pull that you just keep putting off. You say, well, I can't afford that. That's too hard. And that's the other part of the show is I'm going to share with you various tools, especially, let's be honest, especially if you're from North America or Western Europe. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat this, but you're from a rich country and your money is like compared to the rest of the world. You're from a rich country. I'm sorry to break it to you. And your currency, especially if you earn in euros or dollars, your currency will go much farther in literally anywhere else on the planet. And that is part of my privilege. And if you're from North America or Europe, that is part of your privilege too. That is a kind of privilege to be able to be in a developed part of the world. That's true for Australia too. Australia's currency is relatively strong. You might not be in a developed part of the world, or whatever the heck that even means. What does that even mean? I don't know. But you might be from a country that you perceive as poor, or you might be from a country that you perceive as let's say not wealthy. That's fine too. There are tools that I will share that you can still use. It may not be quite as easy. Your money, you know, depending on where you're coming from, that just really does affect how far your money goes. But there are cheaper places that will still go pretty far. So I'm going to be sharing some techniques and things that I've done in ways that I've found opportunities to, for instance, not pay for accommodation at all. In ways that are legal and win-win and beautiful and cultural exchange. And you may already know a couple of these, but I'm going to be happy to share stories of what that's like and the kind of people that I meet. All kinds of people. But before all of that happened, I had to get rid of all my stuff in Honolulu. And I still had paperbacks. I still had physical books. I still had dead trees from my business. I had copies of The Island on the Edge of Forever. I had copies of 10,000 Hours in Paradise, volumes 1, 2, and 3. And I had to do something with that. So I started selling them. Probably illegally. I don't know how illegal this was. Just based on, I don't know, just based on like city code. I mean, I was paying taxes on the earnings. I'm not an idiot. But I started selling them very close to Waikiki. And if you've ever been to Waikiki, it's a very long beach. I was sort of on the edge, and I would set up, maybe we'll call this the first silly story, if it's even a story. I would set up this, I had this shawl, this green shawl that was given to me when I did Vipassana, when I did a meditation course on the Big Island, on Hawaii. And I would lay it out on this grassy little hill. And I was like, I didn't have a table, and I didn't really have a way. I wasn't that far, so I was getting around Honolulu on a bike, a folding bicycle that I really liked. So I was perfectly content to get around Honolulu on a bicycle. And the only time that it would have been nice to have a car would have been when I did that, just to bring a table down. So I set up my books on this shawl, and I had a little stand. I had the stand that I'd used when I sold the books on the other island, on Big Island. And talk about a courage exercise. Now, people would either ignore me, or they would just be like, they would look and they would keep walking, or people would strike up a conversation. And I would do this once a week for several weeks. And I sold some books. I sold a few books, but I had this feeling, and I'm near the sidewalk, and I'm just like, you have to have like an icebreaker. And to me, it was like the more difficult level of what I'd already been doing. So I was already used to talking to people, but that was in a market setting where people were already there with the intention to buy something. I was basically like cold approaching, but not approaching. In fact, approaching, which is what I did later, worked better. It worked better to be able to move around instead of being in one place. This is one of the examples of how I might be a little bit crazy, but I met really nice people. I met a guy in a wheelchair who just wanted to do a book exchange. I was fine with. The guy was kind of, he had a tough life, and he wrote a book about his accident and experience, and I still have that paperback somewhere. And I gradually started simplifying and reducing my inventory. So I had maybe a couple dozen books left over, not very many. I was like, I gotta go somewhere else. And I decided to take the bus to Waimea Bay, which is technically North Shore. And Waimea Bay is this gorgeous crescent-shaped beach of light. Picture an idyllic crescent-shaped beach. Light tan sand. And on one side is this kind of like rocky prominent, like this rocky protrusion you can actually climb up to. It's like 3-4 meters tall. And the waves are just kind of like lapping up. And there's so much sand. People would dig these like huge holes and try to bury each other. And there was an inlet where water would come into the ocean, but sometimes it would just be dry and you could just walk across. Most of the times it was just completely sand. And I would cross the bridge to get over and go in. And I brought this wooden tray that I'd found in the backyard of where I was living. It was just like in the grass. And it was this wooden tray. I don't know what it's for, but it held my books perfectly. And I had these laminated cards, letter size paper, like A4 size paper. And these were from my time of selling at markets in Hawaii. I laminated these at a place, and they had reviews, Amazon reviews, because when you're there in person, it's much better to just show people reviews, and so you don't have to look it up on their phone. Like, this is a real book. This book has 100 reviews, 200 reviews. At that time, I think the first one had it had like 400, and the first 10,000 Hours in Paradise. And I just realized there are many more people on this beach, and they're just chilling. It's not an area of traffic like there was in Waikiki. It is pretty crazy to try to, I was watching what, I don't know, like, I mean, over the course of a couple hours, like, a few hundred people would pass me. It wasn't incredibly busy, but Waimea Bay Beach was much nicer. So I got to hang out there. I'd get there in the mid to early afternoon. Because you have to think about your stamina with these things. And I would go and I would approach random people that in my gut I felt would be readers, and I would approach people who were indeed reading books on the beach, sometimes under an umbrella, with this, just perfectly shading just their face, and they're looking out onto the silk-like blues in the distance, this gray kind of, this silvery blue that can happen on the beach. And I would go, "Hi, I'm a local author and I'm moving soon. So I'm doing a 25% off sale. I write tropical sci-fi and action memoir. And the action memoir is all true. It's so true, I had to give everyone pseudonyms. And it's a story of love and lava and work trade and all that." So I would tell them my spiel, as it were. And people were very nice, and many people were quite interested. I was really pleasantly surprised. The tricky part was many people didn't have cash. So I realized quite quickly that I had to make sure that I had things like Venmo and PayPal already all set up. Fun fact, Venmo was actually much more popular than PayPal, at least for the people visiting Oahu, so go figure. And I even met a bookstore owner who ended up buying several copies from me and putting them in her store. So I met such just lovely, lovely, wonderful people. And I can put some photos of that incredible place. It really is a beautiful. There's these cliffs behind it, and the sunsets in that spot were just mango, delicious orange color coming in. So I would sell for several hours. And it was, I'm not going to lie, like even after doing it for 20 minutes, like I would still have like for the lack of a better word, I would have like social anxiety because you never know. Secret about me that's not a secret. Like most people, I hate being yelled at. I hate people. I hate the feeling of someone just being pissed off at me. I mean, I don't think anybody likes that, but I often feel like an empath, and that can actually throw me off my game for a little while. It used to really get in my head. Now it's not as bad, but I would just like, I pushed myself like I need to sell these because I know I'm leaving soon, and this is like literally like I need the money, and this is like money in a box. This is useful stuff. People, I was in my head about it, hyping myself up. And then I would talk to somebody, and they would say, "Oh no, it's okay." And then I would get to someone else, and they would buy 2 or 3. So it was really a head game. It was really like building up self-confidence, and it's like getting up on stage. The first 3 to 10 minutes are the scary part, and walking around was almost like a sense of stage fright. In the midst of all this, I was having actually a very fun time selling a bunch of stuff too. It really felt like a time of rebirth. I was in a time of just letting so much go. And if you've ever done anything like a huge move, you know that it can feel very freeing to let things go, things you've been holding on to maybe for decades that you maybe didn't use. So I had like an extra MacBook Air charger that I had from when I lived in Utah for 4 seconds. I had a Swiss Army knife, just like random stuff like from college. I used like 3 times in my life. Smart bulbs for some reason that I wasn't using. And it was like wrapping up my life. It was like wrapping up these cumulatively I had spent overall between the first year and a half when I moved into Hawaii and wrote about it in 10,000 Hours in Paradise. And then when I moved back in 2018, cumulatively, I come up to almost exactly 5 years in the state of Hawaii. And now I was wrapping it up, and it felt perfect. Somehow it felt perfect. The timing felt perfect. Of course, I was rushing around before I left, getting over to like the USS Arizona Memorial. Fascinating memorial about all these the lives lost during the World War II battles, where the USS Arizona was sunk in Pearl Harbor. So they had this memorial above it, a really beautiful spot. in going to, I think it's called Hanauma. Yeah, Hanauma Bay, which is some of the best coral you can easily get to. It's a very protected reserve now, so that you have to get a ticket, and the timings are very important. You have to be out by 3. I was very happy to get some photos of that with like no one there. And I can share some of those. That was the last time I snorkeled for several years until I got to the Gilies in Indonesia. I hadn't snorkeled for a really long time. Of course, getting back in the water, it's like no time has passed. I did a place called Three Peaks in Oahu with a friend, which is this wild place north of Oahu that had gale force winds. In fact, we had to stop after the second peak because, well, it was just insane. Like, they had these ropes. You're supposed to be able to go up, and you've probably seen one of the most common pictures of me online. I think it's the picture I'm using on Patreon, was taken on the first peak of Three Peaks in Oahu. I really recommend it. It's in Google Maps. It's public information. It's not a Hawaiian secret. And it's just a trail. It's just, you drive. It's a trail coming off the road near Kailua on Oahu. And the crazy part about that was that I think it was the next day. Yeah, it was the next day. My friend was like, I heard on the news someone died on that trail this week. It's like, what? It's like, yeah, someone died on the exact trail we were on. They tried to get to the third peak, is what he heard. That same week, it might have been just a few days before we actually went there. I was like, oh my God. So when you feel menaced by the environment, don't go to the third peak. Even the second peak was a little bit dangerous. Don't regret it. I don't regret it though, because I listened to my intuition, which is another big theme of this show. Is I didn't push myself to go. Some people did have gone to the third peak, but you don't want to go when it's gale force winds. At least it's just crazy, crazy winds. So in the midst of all this, I'm letting everything go. I was sleeping on the floor because I sold my mattress. I sold my good mic stand. That would be nice to have right about now. I did stand-up comedy one last time. So, this is the first episode of Wanderous. So I'm sort of just building a foundation of Hawaii was my home, but I felt like I'd outgrown it. Not outgrown it, but I felt like it was time to move on, and it would be there for me if I wanted to come back, right? And I missed people on Hawaii Island too. Even though some people that I really enjoyed hanging out with moved away. When flights resumed later in 2020, a lot of people decided to go back and live back near more of their family, because many people in Hawaii, not many people, but some of the people, they go there to restart their life. They have this Hawaii dream, and there are a fair amount of characters in the nonfiction book I wrote that we're really doing this. But when you have a pandemic, obviously your priorities shift, and I really respected people who needed to leave. I respected their decision, even though I missed them. And it's hard to describe. Like the whole kind of dynamic changed, and I was just wrapping up. Even then, even after being in Honolulu for about 7 months, I was like, well, the experiment, the experiment was a success, but I'm going to go. And I did stand up one more time. Occasionally I do stand up comedy, or I did. Maybe I will again. We'll see. And that was really fun. There were a fantastic open mic that was hosted in Honolulu that I went to. And I would tell stories. There were stories that I could even tell on here, but I probably shouldn't. I should probably save it, right? I should save it for the set, and not spoil a set. I can't spoil my set, right? So like I have a set. I have like 3 or 4 or 5 stories that I like to tell that are pretty fun. But I sold almost everything I wanted to sell. I sold a rug. I sold all these things, and it was so funny to be sleeping on the floor and 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 just watching all my possessions get smaller and smaller and smaller. Thing. I didn't have much furniture in the first place, but it was this incredible freeing feeling. And I started to daydream about England, actually, and France, and the places I would go. My grandmother, as I said, is from France, and it was a intention of mine for like a decade to go. I don't want to throw my dad under the bus or anything, but he was saying he was going to go for a really long time. He never went. He's got a lot going on. I'm not throwing shade at my dad, but I was like, you get to a point, especially in the context of thinking about the concussion and that's not the only time I've been very close to death. I write about in 10,000 Hours in Paradise. I write about in the second volume. I write about a crazy car accident where the car flipped. I flipped twice. I wasn't driving, but it flipped, and if that had gone a little bit differently, I wouldn't be making this podcast right now. I wouldn't be. A lot of things would be really different. So when you have a couple near-death experiences, and unfortunately none of the cool ones. Like I don't have any floating over my body experiences, which would be something quite mind-blowing. I feel I don't have that. At least I don't have any memory of that. But when you have the knowledge of your mortality, when you have the knowledge of your mortality fresh in your mind in some way, when you are under no disillusions about it, I've experienced that it helps you make more intelligent decisions. You don't fall into this trap of someday maybe ad infinitum. You don't go someday maybe again and again and again, infinity forever. You go, well, do I really want to do this? Can I do this in the next year? Is there something stopping me from doing it in the next year? Those are useful questions, and that's something we can explore as well. The last things that I saw in Honolulu as I was finally selling these books, and Waimea Bay was a lot better. Again, it was. I don't know if I mentioned, I was walking up to people. I'm holding a tray, right? I'm holding a wooden tray, and I'm approaching people, walking up and down the beach. I start on the north side of the beach, and I make my way over the course of an hour, talking to everyone who seems open, right? Some people are asleep. I'm not an ass. I'm not going to wake somebody up. But I'm talking to everybody who seems open, which is a little more than half. Everybody who my gut says will be receptive. And I'm doing this. And then and sometimes I get to the end and I start going back and see if anybody is new. And my gosh, I ended up having a very good time. And I would take the bus, which took 2 hours to get home, actually, after that, because it was late. And I would go, the $2 bus to get me all the way back. Because Oahu has a good bus system, but it's a little bit slow. And I made it over before I left, I made it over to the Honolulu Aquarium. And just all these little things that I've been putting off, I'm like, I have no more time. I'm either going to see this or I'm not. The last thing that I saw, which was kind of foreshadowing my explorations in Japan, I saw a place called Byodo-in, which is this massive, gorgeous Buddhist temple with a bronze Buddha statue, 10 times the size of a person. And I walk in, pay. It was pretty cheap. It was like $3 across the bridge, and I get to ring the massive the bell. I forget what it's called. Maybe I'll try to look it up. And you have to take off your shoes when you get in, of course. And I take off my shoes. There's such a sense of deep resonance and peace coming off of this massive bronze, I want to say creature, right? And I felt like I was in another country. I felt like I was in another country. I'm going to see if I might put a couple photos in the Patreon for that. Later on, I found out that it was a duplicate of a temple, or is it shrine? I get those mixed up. Of a place near Kyoto. And then it finally came, my time to leave. And I had done everything. I had even sold all except like 3 paperbacks. I had 3 volume 3s left. I sold 90% of what I wanted to sell. I'd minimized all my stuff. I've got my folding bike in its little container, because the exact dimensions that you're allowed to take on a Southwest flight, for what it's worth. I had everything together and organized. I had minimalized is a word I'm just going to invent right now. I have this photo, maybe I will share if people want to see, of basically 3 containers. My Kestrel pack, my waterproof pack, and this big red. I wanted the blue one, but they were all out. So the red came with the bike, where the folding bike is entirely in this wheeled carry-on thing. And I was off to the races. My friend very graciously dropped me off at H&L, the Honolulu airport. Oh, there was one more thing. There was a big black duffel bag, which had been given to me by a hiking partner, very graciously given to me, where I put in just a bunch of like household things. I think that flight I actually got 2 free checked bags. It was miraculous. When you're in the travel magic, when you're in the flow, when things just seem to work out for you, which is another topic of this show, of really paying attention to resistance. And sometimes the resistance is coming with you. I mean, at some level, it's always coming from within you. And sometimes it's coming from the environment. You're in an environment that is set up in a way that may not be in alignment with your goals. So you're going to feel resistance. Like if you're in a place, that's a good example. Like if you're in France and you're lactose intolerant, there's going to be a certain amount of resistance to finding food that is going to be safe for you to eat, which is something I experienced. So you get to navigate that resistance. You have to be putting in a little more work. You have to do your homework and be like, okay, where can I eat? I can eat here and here and here. And baguettes are technically vegan. Did you know that? I did not before I went to France. Baguettes don't have any animal products, which is good to know if you're sensitive to dairy like I am. So I get all my stuff, and I finally, it was kind of emotional for me. I finally get on this jet and look out. I don't even have a photo. It's very odd that I don't have a photo from the plane. I might only have videos. I don't have a photo from the air, but I take the almost 6-hour jump over the northern Pacific, and I get to San Jose, California, pretty near where I was born. And my aunt and uncle picked me up. I left Hawaii, and as of this recording, I haven't been back. I let it go until the right time. I had a little interlude, which is the word I would say. I had an interlude in the Bay Area, which is the area around the San Francisco Bay, a beautiful, rather expensive, but beautiful part of the country, catching up with cousins and doing things. I finally made it to the San Francisco Public Library, which I heartily recommend. For some reason, I ended up going through like the old records of the Congress. I have a photo of looking at the 43rd Congress. It was an entire row of just every matter they dealt with, every year, going like just for the last 250 years almost. I even visited the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Love the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They fight for our rights as customers and normal people on the internet, fighting for individuals' rights and privacy. They were working with things like net neutrality. I also made it over to the Cable Car Museum, which I really recommend if you ever make it to San Francisco. You can see these massive flywheels with cables strung over them. You can stand over this works, like it's basically a workshop, and you can see the cables kind of plunge into this lower area, and all of the cable cars in San Francisco grab onto cables that are driven from this spot. So, you get to see the whole rice-a-roni situation where the rice-a-roni is a food. I don't know. Does anybody even know about rice-a-roni anymore? San Francisco continues to be a beautiful city. I really recommend it, especially after the pandemic for some reason. It seemed cleaner. I don't know if it's just because there were less people, probably. Visited Coit Tower, saw these gorgeous, orange balloons, and made it to a little concert. But it was just interludes. It was just like, I know what I'm doing, and what I was doing was I had my sights set on London. First, I would be in London because it's a separate visa than the rest of Europe. And I thought I would start out easy, right? I thought I would start out with the same language and then make it up, hopefully make it up to Scotland, we would see. But when I got to London, it wasn't quite what I expected. But I will save that story of flying over the beautiful Atlantic Ocean, not to mention the craziness of transferring in Toronto, which was way more stressful than it should have been. I will save that story for next time. Thanks for listening to episode 1. Once again, my name is Andrew Crusoe. Feel free to find this show anywhere you find your podcasts. And you can always find me at @Hello Crusoe on TikTok and Instagram, and andrewcrusoe.com, where you can find my books. 10,000 Hours in Paradise is 99 cents right now. And every dollar goes to basically to help keeping me alive and things like that. And it lets me continue to produce this show. This is something that has been kind of in the back of my mind, but it just kind of came together recently. It just was like, it seemed so obvious. Of course, I should talk about what I've learned doing this and give it to my patrons, but also make it free so anyone can listen to it. And if you do feel inspired to join the Patreon, I do have a crazy amount of content available for $5 a month. I give away, I provide for that $5 like something like 24 hours of audiobook material from 10. Actually, no, it's about 28 hours now from 10,000 Hours in Paradise, all 3 volumes, professionally produced. Those are on Audible. They would cost you $60, but you can listen to all of those on Patreon. There's a whole directory I have on my website that you can get to the links really easily. And you can stream that on any device. It's really easy. You can do it from your phone. Just connect your phone to your car, and you can listen to it driving across the country. You can feel like you're in Hawaii and hear some of the crazy stuff that happened to me there. I have a history of doing this, like having crazy experiences, eccentric, more, let's just, maybe not eccentric, let's say slightly more edgy, slightly unusual, I would say, experiences. And then talking about them, then sharing stories about them. But I've never done a podcast like this before. I've never done a solo show before. So this is a new thing for me. But there have been a couple things lately that have inspired me to try this out. So let me know if this let me know what you feel about this format. I'm not going to edit it. I will put in music because I like the music, but this is a show about authenticity. It's a show about self-acceptance, and I feel confident that if I put my intention forward, if I move forward with authenticity, that you will forgive, dear listener, a few rough edges. You'll forgive a few imperfections here and there, and perhaps, you will even appreciate it a little bit more because you know that it's raw and real, and I'm not being a perfectionist. This is just me, and I'm sharing my experience, and my intention is to encourage you to go outside your comfort zone as well. Because the real thesis of this whole show is that I feel that travel is the most powerful classroom that Earth has to offer. Travel is the most profound, occasionally out of body, intense, can be the most healing, the most unanticipated, the most, I don't know how else to say except profound experience you can have in your life. And I'm not the only person to have this message. Very few things are new under the sun, but I do feel that I can put my unique spin on it, and I've had my own unique experiences pursuing this intuition, pursuing this compulsion, I guess. So thanks again for listening, and I'd love to hear your comments, especially if you join. When this goes to Patreon, well, it is on Patreon. Having been Patreon. If you are following for free, and I really value, even if you can't afford $5 a month, I really value you following for free because we have wonderful conversations. It's basically my own little social club, and you're invited to the club. And it's a very supportive, beautiful place where we encourage each other to travel and to go outside our comfort zones and be awesome human beings and to grow all the time. So I would really invite you to check that out. I've been doing Patreon for good gracious. I'm not going to say how many years because this is an evergreen show. Do you know what that means? Evergreen means that it's actually from the music industry. If a song was evergreen, it's like Wonderful Christmas Time. You know, The Moon Is Up, by Paul McCartney. That actually made Paul McCartney more money than any other song he wrote because that's an evergreen song and they play it every single Christmas. So it doesn't matter what year it was written. It doesn't matter what year it was written. It's an evergreen. It means time doesn't matter. And that's my intention for this show as well. I want it to be evergreen. It's not really important necessarily when I record these episodes because they're all about things that happen more than a year before the recording. Does that make sense? Probably. If you're listening to this, you're probably a pretty smart person. So that's episode 1. Thanks for coming along with me. And next time, we're going to talk about England. We're going to talk about miraculous weather. And we're just going to keep moving forward. And if you have any questions, please feel free to join the Patreon. Join the Patreon for free so you can comment and ask questions. And I will be receptive to ideas and questions that you have, especially as I move forward with this. And could even elaborate on past stories, maybe, if you ask very good questions. But there's a lot to cover, as I said. You know, England, Scotland, France, Belgium, Germany, Turkey, Nepal. Nepal is amazing. India, also amazing. Sri Lanka, amazing. Japan, not what you'd expect. Indonesia. Farewell and fare forward. Crusoe signing out.